Hi, thanks for joining us. We've talked a lot on FNS about ideas around liberty and democracy, talked about who exactly are this we and how are decisions made that affect us all. These are philosophical questions and political questions, but they're also practical questions about what this big we does and what actually happens in our lives in our shared world. Today's episode is unique against the background of these conversations. It's different in that, though it's rooted in philosophy and the political mechanism, it's not just talk. It's grounded in action, past and ongoing action that's already had a noteworthy impact in the right direction. The direction of popular representation, the direction of collective responsibility, and a vision of building a future. But there's some things we need to discuss that we've kind of been avoiding, and that's where the rhinoceros head comes in. So years ago, I did this thing with Werner Erhard's organization, and he used to have this conversation about a bloody rhinoceros head. And the way he described it is through this little vignette. He said, imagine a young couple that's going out on the first date, and they're sitting at a restaurant, and the real conversation is whether they're going to have, or rather the real topic that's hanging in the air is about whether they're going to have a romantic encounter in the future or not. But the conversation that they have is going to be about music and about friends and common interests, and it'll be anything about that topic of the romantic encounter. And so Werner would say that this topic is sitting on the table between them like a bloody rhinoceros head that nobody's going to talk about or mention. Instead, they're going to talk about everything else. So the idea of a bloody rhinoceros head is the thing that everybody kind of knows is happening, that's happening between us all, as if it's sitting there like a bloody rhinoceros head on the table between us. But we're going to talk about other things. We're going to talk about sports and the weather and other, things that don't affect us so much. So in this case, the bloody rhinoceros head is about the state of our we, of this big we. And necessarily then it's about the state of the fulfillment of our democratic ideals. So please try and stick with this one. It's long, but it's not only important, it's also a roadmap. Enjoy liberty, democracy, localism, and the bloody rhinoceros head.
Hi, welcome to the Fools and Sages podcast. We are very excited to have back with us Paul Fenn. Paul is the founder of Local Power LLC, the inventor of Community Choice Aggregation, and actually several iterations of Community Choice Aggregation, whereby municipalities can make their own decisions about energy. And Paul is also recently the author of the Localist Manifesto, and that's what we're hoping to drill into here today. So welcome, Paul. Great to have you with us. And I'm just going to ask a big picture question out of the gates. What is the problem that the Localist Manifesto is addressing?
It's really democracy and the failure thereof is the problem. Democracy as a belief system, in a sense, the ultimate belief system of our civilization, but with it, liberty. These two ideas that are like a faith to I would say virtually every American on some level, and yet which are really problematic in terms of how they play out in our politics. It's a book that's trying to find the kernel of democracy as something which is achievable, while not pretending that it has been achieved or that it's really in any evidence at all in United States politics. It's also questioning within that the idea of liberty, the American concept of liberty, which I would say could be described by driving down the highway really fast in your favorite car, but having very little to do with any or being left alone, a negative liberty. But the idea of having any kind of positive liberty really also just as absent as democracy. And so it's not taking really as a theoretical problem, but as a practical problem in a world that demands democracy or that demands some other form of government to deal with a lot of problems. So it's not so much the kind of 18th century book about democracy, which was very utopian and very premised on perfecting the world and the idea that we were going to perfect the world. We were going to put religion behind us and monarchy behind us, and we were going to become democracies, and we were going to become reasonable, and we were going to self-govern and create a new world. Well, those days are over. And now we're in a period of disillusionment and collapse. We have effectively dictatorships emerging within our political system. Behind them are oligarchies, political parties that will not surrender power over their control of representative institutions, oligarchies within the media, within the legal system that are wholly entrenched, completely unrestrained. The checks and balances that were imagined to exist by James Madison and the Constitution have only disempowered the people. They have not disempowered oligarchies or prevented concentrations of power behind elites. And so it's really trying to come to terms as an American with a situation of political failure, which cannot be addressed through the party structure or through conventional political discourse. At the same time, acknowledging that this can't just be a theoretical question. If it's a theoretical question, it's unresolvable, which is why I think we're stuck in the dilemma that we keep arguing about it as a faith, the way that Christians would argue about God versus Christ and who came first and all this kind of stuff, the Holy Trinity, the Holy Ghost. These abstract discussions get us nowhere. We have to have two things. We need philosophy, but we also need history to know how we got here. And that's a specific history going back to the revolutions. So the book tells that history, and it could be called the history of the left, but it's really the history of enlightenment itself, which was essentially a leftist idea, but then also a path forward, a practical possibility of something else. And so it's presenting the work of the last 30 years that for me, which was a demonstration of an idea of democracy based on specifically local municipal action, and trying to examine it ruthlessly, really, to see where democracy fails, even in its best forms. Rather than focusing on the failure as the archetype at the federal level and federal politics were obviously a failure, but just looking down just to the town meeting, to the city council meeting, to activism, to the best instances of this idea and how they also have problems, and to try to reflexively go back and forth between how did this happen, how did we get here, and then also where can we go and what can be done and how would that work, so that it's both retrospective, looking back, but also looking forward, so that it can show some examples and some promise. However imperfect my efforts have been to sort of reflect also on the failure of that process and the frustrations, and to try to be honest about it, because I do think we struggle with being honest about these two words, democracy and liberty, because they are a faith, because we hold them so dear. That in a sense they transcend this world the way that religious idols transcend reality. And no matter what happens in the world, we protect them, we maintain them. And that's part of the problem, that how do we be true to these ideals, but not pretend that we have achieved them, or that we in a way deserve to pretend that we've achieved them the way I think we do.
Before
Go ahead.
we get into the solution more, I wonder if for our listeners you could expand on the problem a little bit. You said something in the middle there about the checks
Mm.
and balances that were intended in the Constitution um, are, are essentially disempowering the people. I wonder, or to use your language, disempowering persons. I wonder how. Um, can you give our listeners some examples of what you see as a complete failure of democracy at a national level?
Well, I mean, the most obvious example is is in our the most centralizing cases. The presidential elections, which have obviously become a farce. The last two elections being the most obvious. The last three elections, in which political parties choose the candidates outside of any real primary process. They admit it in the courts that they're doing that. The courts admit that they have the right to do that, and they continue to do that. And so, we are participating in presidential elections, which are really no better than a Cuban election, right, where the Communist Party picks all the candidates, and you get to pick your favorite one. And they call that democracy in Cuba. They do. I've been there, and that's what they told me. It's like, are you kidding me? Right. And this is in the late 90s. But today, I have to say, I no longer feel smug about it. It's like, okay, now I understand. Like, I'm trapped. I don't know what to do either. And so I think that's the most obvious example. But they're less obvious. And I think part of it plays out in any form of representation. That's where I try to get into religion and to see the religious origins of our political ideals. That I really do think representation comes from religious ideas, and like the idea of the Eucharist, that the wine is the blood and the bread is the body, and this sort of mesmerism of the ritual, where the priest's power is made manifest in this bizarre way, in which people enter into a deliberate kind of a state of aphasia, and act as though the bread is the body, and so we act as though someone elected has been anointed, and we act as though they do represent us, and in the halls of power, whether in Congress or in state legislatures or in city councils, this dynamic is in play. And I do think it is mad, and that it's madness inducing for all involved, and particularly for elected officials, for the psychology of an individual who runs for office. And I've known many who were elected to mayors or to city councilors in big cities or in small towns. And every one of them, I observe them undergoing a kind of psychological transformation in which they cease to be who they were. They cease to be merely individuals, and they become something bigger. And then they want to retain what they've gained in the sort of demigod status. They're become terrified because they lose themselves when they gain that greater thing, being a representative of the people. My constituents, you hear this term all the time, my constituents. They lose themselves. And so when they're run out of office, these people are like empty husks, and they have been emptied of themselves, and they no longer have the demigod in them. So they become nothings, and many of them become lobbyists, I think, for that reason, because they really don't have any internal purpose anymore. I do think there's something profoundly antithetical in the idea of representation to democracy, and that, in a sense, Madison's whole goal in writing the Constitution, and the Federalist goal in adopting the Constitution, was to put a lid on the revolution, was to stop democracy and replace it with systems and balances that were really there to prevent the formation, in a sense of that Rousseau would have said, of a general will within the House of Representatives. That you could not form a will inside of this government. There are too many opposing elements, so that the real purpose of the government is a kind of machine to prevent the formation of a will. And one could say for a central government, maybe that's a good model, because maybe a central government is just an empire, and maybe it really can do no good. Maybe it really has no purpose other than war, or imperialism, or might have some juridical value, the courts to protect rights, or to um, but as far as active governance, maybe that isn't such a bad model. But at the local level, the problem is that government took over. It absorbed the powers of the states. The states absorbed the powers of municipalities, in effect became like municipalities, no longer sovereign. They became supplicants. And in the relationship that we have now, the only government we have is designed to prevent the people from forming a general will. And the media then, in addition to the oligarchies within the government, the Supreme Court being an oligarchy, which restrains whatever the Congress does, whatever the president does, the Senate, which restrains the House, the political parties, which restrain the selection of candidates. You have all these oligarchies folded into this entity, so many layers of opposition, that it becomes like Kafkaesque kind of castle in which no one really knows what's going on except for very few within that castle. And the parties become the dominant factor in controlling who is placed into the key positions. Of course, the parties themselves are not democratically governed organizations. And so, in effect, we end up with a party state, or states within a state, that govern adversarially and manipulatively, and have radically departed from any kind of idea of democracy or of parliamentary form as a meaningful goal, and instead treat all the forms of government as means to whatever ends they have. And I think the public has gradually, we have embraced this. We've dropped any kind of commitment to democratic forms, and we're just now concerned with the outcomes. Who will best give us a growing economy? Who will give us whatever we want. We want healthcare. We want to dominate the world. We'll take whoever will give it to us. Yeah, Brian, please.
So, I jumped into your book, and the first impression that I had was it made me think of when Nelson Mandela talks about throwing babies in the river. And he says that, you see a baby coming down the river, so naturally you're focused on that baby. You pull it out the river, okay, we're back to normal, but then another baby comes. And so you jump with that, but at some number baby, you say, wait a minute, we have to go upriver and see who keeps throwing these babies in the river. And it seems now that the impression that I got from your book, at least the beginning sections of it, was that now there's so many babies coming down the river. It's beyond our practical response to be able to responsibly address every baby that's coming down the river. We must now go upstream. We have no choice now but to find out what is the mechanism. Where is this baby launcher that keeps filling this river up with babies? Is that a fair allusion to the situation that we're in, and that the problem, the crux of that baby launcher, has to do with whether it's democracy or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've there's always been this tension between and within the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment was partly scientific and partly philosophical, and the part that was scientific was originally philosophical. But the two sort of gradually separated. Right, you had the period during which a philosopher would study science and society or history is over. Now you have this very highly specialized disciplines, on both sides, highly specialized scientists, highly specialized humanists, a lack of unity between forms of knowledge that it causes this kind of cacophony, or this sort of Tower of Babel effect, where the knowledge exists somewhere, I think, but no one really possesses it. We all have to perceive knowledge on the outside as something part of a productive apparatus, but not a culture, not something shared. But that apparatus has been given up to capital, right? It's given up to on the economic side, it's given to capital. So science now works for capital, and then to empire, to military administration, and these are the drivers of science today, not philosophy, not any idea, and these are fairly destructive constituencies that fund science to make things, and which everything from bombs to consumer products, and that's the ecological crisis, right? That's the baby coming down the river. That there, we're now up to 70,000 forever chemicals that in the landfills, right? And in addition to just obviously a very, very long list of ecological crises caused primarily by capital-funded science, and we are not able to deal with the sheer volume of crises that are coming at us. And so this is what's, I think, in part driving us back toward dictatorship, is that we're losing confidence in our capacity to rationally process this world or do anything about what's happening. And so it's like, okay, just give it to Trump. He'll do it, But of course, he's not going to do it. He's doing the opposite. He's turning it up to 10. And why? Because he's controlled by them. The government itself is captured by capital, and itself is imperialist. So they are destroyers that have no interest in solving any of these problems. So it really is a crisis of humanity, in which democracy is simply necessary. That if we're not capable of finding our way through this, and at least reflectively learning from the failure of our idea of democracy and forming an altered idea of what it means, then we're facing extinction. And that's the situation, that we really have no choice in that sense. It's no longer, like I said, about human perfection, but about survival. That to survive, we've got to do this better. And to do it better, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does that mean? If we can't do it in Congress, if we can't do it in international agreements, if we can't pick presidents, if we can't somehow break the political parties, it does not appear any of those things are ever going to happen, ever. So therefore, it implies a turning away from those theaters, that those theaters are not where it's at. It's not going to happen there. We're not going to ever get a good president. We're not ever going to get a Congress that is not corrupt. We're never going to have judges on the Supreme Court who care about the Constitution or want to protect our rights. Those things, that is like waiting for kingdom come. And so what is it, that we're going to do? What do we got to do?
I just want to stop you because this problem's not a new problem. I just finished reading On Revolution by Hannah Arendt, and it gave me a lot of new pieces. And one of my big ahas, and I've also was reading at the same time Kropotkin and some of his revolutionary writings, and somewhere in between two of them, it was revealed to me that the original idea behind the United States, and I thought it was attributed to Thomas Jefferson, was that every state would be organized down to wards, which was much smaller than a county, and that the opinion of the wards would aggregate to the county, and the county to the state, and the state. But that was sort of the promise, because she does a lot of juxtaposing the French Revolution to the American Revolution, saying that the Americans were already organized on a local level.
Yeah.
And so when the revolution happened, it was very natural, the idea of self-government, whereas in Europe, they were still used to kings and all of that. And that they also had very different ideas about human nature. And that's a whole conversation that I think is a big aspect of your book, the psychology and the human nature of it. But my biggest point is that I feels like something's been trying to happen here through history. The Reformation and the doctrine of the universal priesthood. You no longer need a priest. But it's like the representative government is another kind of priest we didn't seem to get rid of. But it seemed like there was that idea in all these revolutions. Like a Soviet, I learned, is actually that smallest ward unit of the people, which got swept out of power by the party.
Yeah.
It seems like in America, much to the against the caution of our forefathers, parties got in there. Your book seemed to suggest that they were put in, but I don't know. Did they elbow their way in? Are they parasitical, or were they part of the plan originally? Because it really seems to me has been evident since at least the past 10 years. Before that, if you were watching, but even if you're not watching close, the past 10 years, it seems like parties are out of control. And seems like that's true in China, that's true in Russia, that's true. Like this is where we're at. Parties have sideswiped democracy. I mean, does that kind of fit with your picture, you think?
Certainly, Brian. Yeah, the parties. That's a very funny, strange story. I do have a part of the book that sort of touches on it when during the constitutional debate is really when the parties kind of formed, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, papers. And it was curious is that they appeared to show a kind of shame in doing so, because many of them wrote under pseudonyms. And in that debate, they weren't writing under their own names, and very few cases were they kind of public about who they were. And so everyone was very secretive. And Jefferson, just as guilty as anyone, um, would publicly denounce parties as unpatriotic factions, sectarian factions, but then was himself, in a faction. And so it's just the idea broke down. And so I do tend to think for that, along those lines, that really representation, the idea of representation, and this goes back. I mean, this goes back to early 18th century political theory prior to the revolutions, thinking about democracy, that representation is in many ways responsible for the formation of parties. That it follows from the idea that you would, as Rousseau says, that you would appoint someone in your own place to go and deliberate on questions. Once you have done that, you have destroyed the possibility of a general will. There simply is no general will in a representative government. And so the abrogation of responsibility that occurs a priori in that system, the very act of voting is an act of giving up your part in that process. We proudly wear a sticker, "I voted," every time we give someone else power, and pretending that's virtuous, when in fact it's quite vicious. It's a voluntary slavery, in effect. And then wearing the proud insignia of the slave, and then going to others and shaming them for not being slaves too. Something really quite disgusting about it. And I think it really comes down to the problem of numbers, right? So if you get into these discussions like Rousseau and Godwin, the original British anarchist, writing about these things, just the problem of numbers, Rousseau was very clear, though, in terms of his whole thesis on the general will, which was a hugely influence on the French Revolution. And yet those who used him in the French Revolution ignored his repeated statements that it had to be municipal, that you had to be able to, everyone had to attend these meetings, that if everyone is not present in the decision-making of a community, then it simply is not a democracy. And there's no two ways about it. You can't say, well, let's cut the baby in half and have half the people present, or a quarter or the tenth of the people. Make it as good or as close as we can. And this idea that you can be lesser or more democratic, as opposed to either you are or you are not, and then extract or derive a form of government based on that principle. Instead, we announce a form of government, nationalism, the nation state, and then from there derive a political system which we attempt to democratize but fail.
Paul, I want to go back to something you said. So I agree that the United States has a host of problems, and some of them may be as fundamental as you make them out to be. But I think we'd be doing our listeners a disservice if we didn't talk a little bit more about what you're calling um, uh, capital in service of imperialism. Fundamentally, I think there are a lot of quite credible historians who would take issue with that, and I'm not a historian, nor a scholar, but I think I, I could imagine an argument along the lines of, yeah, the United States has gotten involved in some things that serve capital and aren't in mutual best interest. However, the United States has also done the world a service in other ways, and I'm thinking, for example, in the post World War II era, that the United States provided security and economic support for world trade to start up again and enrich um, countries other than the United States, not only the United States. So I wonder, that's not a good enough argument that I expect you to hit that one back over the net, but maybe you can make some more critical statements about what you mean by imperialism and why you think that's a fundamental movement here.
Okay, I'll try. Yeah, I guess I'm not trying to single out the United States as really in this respect. I'm really in the book trying to identify the continuity of behavior between the U.S. empire, which we live in today, and the British Empire of the 19th century, and its competitors, primarily the French, but also the Germans, um, whose empires were largely formed around originally the slave trade, and then mercantile trade, global trade as such. These phenomena are connected in the sense that that the global trade system of the United States is based upon energy. And so the book is very focused on energy because energy is the sort of the current form of that system versus slavery. So it's looking at slavery as the original form, and then looking at how it has sort of evolved into an industrial form, and specifically linking that change from a form of that sacrifices human beings to which is the slave or the serf in some places, to a system that sacrifices all of the earth, which is energy, climate change. And so the form of destruction changes with it. And I don't, uniquely single out America. America did not cause oil or, gas, but we are the empire of that system. And we are, as Americans, uniquely responsible for the destruction that is going on for that reason. Our government sets the stage for example, the adoption of these same systems by China, by so-called competitors, who imitate it in every detail. So we're setting the example, and we're consenting as Americans to a government. We're participating in a government which right now is primarily responsible. So I only single it out in the sense of like contemporary moral responsibility, but also an opportunity for us we are the ones who ought to learn from this and who ought to find new pathways. We've gone through it first. We have lived in this system longer than other people have. This is pretty new to the third world to live the way that we do. It'll take them, I think, quite some time to realize how awful it is, frankly, how destructive it is to society, how destructive it is to our minds, not just to ecology. But I do think I see a lot of continuity, and it's not that I certainly would never deny that America's ever done anything good. I'm not an anti-American. I'm not trying to say that America is the evil empire and we must destroy it. In fact, the book is saying there's nothing we can do about this system. The problem isn't really that we cannot destroy the empire. It's that we're addicted to it. We're addicted to its spectacle. We're addicted to its meanings, its rituals. And that's what really makes us enable it. We give it our power. We give it our aspiration, our hope. We listen to politicians say that they're going to, achieve all these things, promising equality or promising, more freedom or more equality or more democracy. And we tolerate this behavior, sort of priestly effrontery, when we ought to know, after so many elections, so many decades, our entire lives for us, adult lives, that this is a charade and it is disgraceful and incoherent. It has never been anything but, and we've got to shake it off, and understand what it is, and find our way into the future in some other manner. And I do think there's a great deal of that's why the history it crosses European history with American. So it's really focused on, the English Revolution first, 1649, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and then in the 19th century is very focused on Europe, because that's really the center of imperialism and the rise of capitalism, the crisis of 1830, 1848, the Paris Commune, 1871, and looking at how the left evolved, how Enlightenment thought evolved through that century, when the ideas of the Enlightenment were incorporated into political activity, were articulated, became powerful, caused wars, caused geopolitical change to occur, and it caused an incredibly profound disillusionment in the ending years of the 19th century. So for me, that's always been kind of the center of the whole subject. It's actually not in America. I don't think we're the center of this phenomenon. I think Europe is, and in particular, England, France, Germany, that these three countries produced virtually all of our political ideas and played out those ideas, versus America, which was more of a backwater and anti-intellectual, kind of bumpkins. There's very little of importance in political thought in America and the United States in the 19th century. It's just kind of imitative and reading European books and then writing half-assed imitations of European books. Pretty much is all Americans did. And so,
Except
but you had. I'm sorry,
Americans are focused, like you are, on the question, what do we do? Which was not a continental philosophy kind of a focus, was it? I mean, Americans have a pragmatism that may make them suited to face this problem better than the European foundation that kind of sowed the seeds of it. I mean, would you agree with that? Do you think? Do we have
Yeah, I
any
do.
hope in that respect?
Oh, I do. No, I think Americans do have, and Baudrillard had this argument too. He was in his book America, the Last Primitive Society. He wrote back in the 80s. Great book. It's a really great book. It's a travel journal of the United States. Very readable. It's his most readable book. But he basically was saying the same thing, which I always thought was very salient. That we're not really good at that. Europeans are good at thinking things and not doing anything, and Americans don't think much except what to do. And so, yeah, action oriented. I do think it's an American tradition. I do think it's very valuable and very important, and it's a critical cultural resource for us as a society, that we are practical and we're not doing it we're not thinking in an ascetic visionary tradition, but when we say things politically, in some ways we mean it. And so there is great potential here. I'm certainly not condemning American society. Maybe that's the way it comes out in the book. But I was more interested in really the failures that occurred on the left in Europe and particularly in Germany and under the direction of Karl Marx. The entry into representative government by the left in the 1880s, which was really tragic and resulted in essentially the first kind of Hillary Clinton moment, I would say, in history, which is the completely utterly two-faced hypocrite moment of political theory in the Socialist Party in Germany and around the turn of the century, and which caused this massive intellectual crisis in Europe that is not really adequately studied. Because it's really disturbing, I think, and mostly and I get into it in the book that you had. I don't know if you reached this. They've read this chapter about the rise of fascism within the anti-war movement in the decade before World War I. That fascinating to me how the celebrated leadership of the German Socialist Party are the ones who caused World War I, basically. They signed the war powers. They funded the preparation for war, every time excusing themselves. And all the while, the more radical factions who were anarchists or who were kind of left socialists were freaking out. From 1900 to 1914, we're in a panic. And there's this huge body of discourse and congresses and books and writings about what is going on. The Socialist Party of Germany, which had become this huge party, 3 million members by the turn of the century, the largest left-wing party in the world, and had all this authority because it was turning into this horrible bureaucracy. And that ultimately kind of sold out. And so many of those who were showing up at their congresses, getting dragged out by police because they would not condemn militarism of their own government, the German government of Bismarck. And the French were growing increasingly alarmed that these German socialists would not do this. And even though they were called, let's do it, call for a general strike. If anyone starts a war, that's the revolution. We'll have a revolution. And this is a very sensible thing to say at the time because the militarism happening was all imperial. It was incredibly cynical. There was no idealism to this militarism. It was all imperial aggression with no justification. So you have socialist parties that are major party in Austria and Germany that could have resisted that war and chose not to. And they did so because they believed they would lose power and the working class would turn against them. But if you look at that prehistory, you can see why that happened. And it has very much to do with the separation of the movement from popular movement into two wings, the politicians and the unions. And both factions, essentially, as they separated into these bureaucracies, became really toxic and lost all of their ideals and became essentially collaborators with capital and with imperial governments. And it left all the radicals who remained idealistic out in the lurch. And these were people that are fairly obscure today. Gustav Herve, you've probably never heard of him. He was pretty famous because at the time, like 1900 to 1910. But there are a number of them, Werther Serge, all these people that ended up being kind of spewed out the side of left-wing movements, rejected by the parties, the official party apparati in France and Germany and Belgium, as the war approached. And many of them became fascists. Many of them joined Mussolini. Mussolini was a syndicalist anarchist who opposed war. And so we have this sort of false history of the war that's largely because we are Americans, where we pretend that Hitler caused Nazism instead of really being kind of the inheritor of it. And the way that Trump, we see people pretend that Trump caused something. He's really just this basket that catches the failure of all the parties. He didn't really do anything. He's just sitting there going, "Thank you very much. I own it now." And it's just the vacuity of the discourse, the emptiness of how we think, and we're reduced to this point where the public will. I mean, for example, where the public will embrace in any given war, that comes up. By our time now, the Americans are probably a majority support the invasion of Venezuela. Okay, we have been completely evacuated of any kind of philosophical integrity, and it's not by Trump. It's by the entire political establishment that itself has become that vacuous. So we can't see a representation of any idea that we would naturally have about that these wars are meaningless, that they're obviously not justified. We're blowing up boats full of Colombians claiming that they're from Venezuela, or blowing up Afghanistan, or blowing up Iraq. War after war after war, leading to no accumulation of memory, no increasing anger, shame, or frustration, no movements, no resistance, nothing. And so for me, that's the trajectory it's the failure of the Enlightenment. It's the failure of the idea that we can do anything, and which is a continuity going all the way back to the late 18th century, and it relates to the philosophy itself, that the philosophy itself is flawed. And so it isn't just something that happened. Representation is flawed, and negative liberty is flawed. And so it's like we need to come up with the right philosophy. And so for me, that takes me to the early anarchists, mostly to Proudhon, but also to Godwin, other thinkers that are also got shut out the side of the machine decades ago and are not that well known, but who did recognize very early on, 1820s, 30s, 40s, that the revolutions were failures, and that there were problems and needed to be addressed. And that, I think there's a past there, there's tradition, there's thought there. Isn't all a failure. It's just that those who prevailed were wrong. Marx was wrong, Madison was wrong. And so the most famous of all political thinkers were the bad guys, basically. And so we get trapped in their logic. Just the same as you mentioned, the Soviets and the Soviet Union. Lenin trapped in the logic of Marx and crushing the Soviets, which were the revolution. He crushed the revolution and named his country after the local municipal governments that had revolted, and which he killed. He killed them, and then he named his government after them. So you have this sort of appropriation, like naming rivers after the American Indians and pretending that you're honoring them by doing that. Killing your, memorializing all your victims, and creating this false history, this false memory. I think there's a lot of history that can really enrich the discussion. In the past, it isn't just we have to invent something totally new, but we have to go back to that revolution that we consider archetypal and essential, the sacred events of our idealism, the English Revolution, the French Revolution, and the American Revolution, and question those philosophies, and not in the name of destroying liberty and democracy, but representation, trying to unwind these mechanisms that were created in the name of those words, out of a devotion to our ideals, but to find something that works in the name of survival.
Paul, we've said a few times on this show something to the effect of, kind of any of the systems, political or economic, that have been proposed would probably work fairly well if there were a modicum of virtue in the in the system and its constituents. I think you're saying something quite different, that Madison was wrong, and Marx was wrong, and all of these systems are fundamentally flawed. And I think the flaw, if I'm understanding correctly, has to do with representation specifically. and that changing how we relate to democracy and liberty is the solution. Can you flesh that out for us and
Yeah.
help us understand what the solution looks like, why it's not just a problem of virtue, but actually a problem of the systems that we've designed? And then maybe we can bat that around some.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the core concept for me is it goes back to religion. I think we got our ideals from religion, and that when we think democracy, we really are thinking self-denial, sacrifice, asceticism. That idealism is a form of asceticism. And so our ideal of democracy is that we all come together and we govern selflessly. We make decisions concerning law, concerning the Constitution and rights outside of the context of economics. And that economics are a separate sphere, the material sphere. There's the ideal and there's the material. And so our democracy is only concerned with the rules of the game, so to speak. But we're not going to touch property. We're not going to touch um, the marketplace. That has to be left to its own. It is a separate dimension. This also has its past, obviously, in the legal systems of the Germans when they invaded France, that they set up these systems, these dual systems that had one law for the German warriors, and then another law for the locals who were living under their control. And this is where you get the original separation within the law between criminal law and property law. That they're separate spheres, and so one, I think that there has to be. There's no possibility of any innovation within the political and economic constitution unless it is localized, and the reason is that the efforts to do that at the nation state level were so catastrophic, and the catastrophes of the French Revolution, the Terror, the Russian Revolution. In particular, the killing of 30 million Russians by the government, the incredible violence of national revolutions makes it completely untenable as a theater of operations. That's why we have such fear about change, is that the last time anybody tried to change the rules, everybody got killed. And we just don't want to do that again. And really no one in their right mind would want to do that again. So that's partly where, for me, localism is this de facto. It has to be a local phenomenon that, in order to not be catastrophic, in order to create an opening for what I would call liberty, political liberty, to be able to think outside of the box of that old toolkit, that old mechanism of the Montesquieu and Madison system of checks and balances, into a much more positive structure that recognizes the need to actively govern, right? Which is the babies coming down the river. We have to be able to deal with a crisis every week, and the human-made crises. We have to be able to govern sciences and economic activities that are immensely destructive. We have to be able to act more quickly, to be responsive. We have to be able to learn and not have people incriminated by learning. And so to have that freedom, that liberty, it's got to be local first. And within that, once you've decided that it's local, then I think you can derive some ideas from that. And the first idea is that local government is incredibly boring. Right? If any of us who have gotten involved in local government, it's very depressing. It's boring. It's a ghetto. It's full of kind of lost souls and this kind of detritus of humanity that for some, they're crazy or they're weird or they're corrupt. Almost everyone who's involved in local politics is weird. And I mean, so when you go there, you feel like you're going to a madhouse because it's not impressive. It's not exciting. It's not good. It's awful. It's like going to church.
Developer.
I'm sorry? Developers.
It's
Is that what you said?
all real estate developers.
Right. And sharks, parasites, criminals, lobbyists, a lot of, shiny boots and cheap suits or expensive suits, but just is this like this? We're supposed to, this is democracy? And so the first thing is to concede that, because I do this for a living, going into city hall, town hall, not always. There are some very good people in local government. There really are. Because compared to central state government, I would say much more human, much more real, much better. But nevertheless, you have to concede that that environment, particularly the public meeting, going to a city council meeting, waiting through the speakers, that this is a horror show, right? That this is just awful. So we have to acknowledge that, like, it's not as though it's some kind of wonderful thing that we have to go back to and re-embrace it as the true democracy. It is not that. It's not that now. But that it needs to be. It needs to be a place of much greater. Sorry, Brian.
And there's another point that I think that Hannah Arendt brought out in the relationship that we have as citizens. She was saying that when we're really organized on that local level, it isn't a condition of the citizen just acquiescing in a passive state, that when you're there with your neighbors, the foundation of it is actually more of an active promise to all of your neighbors, to all the members of your community, in a much more assertive way. Maybe assertive is not the right word. In an active way. And it seems to me that maybe that spirit of acquiescence, because, when you were saying we have to be able to politically to address these issues, and it points out to some of the issues I also have with the left, and that is we have to be able to solve these issues by addressing them honestly. It can't just be, because Plato said that the people figure out how to rob the treasury. And that's what I see is like every new issue, instead of looking at the root cause of why this is all going down, every new issue is a new cash cow for someone who's got an NGO that they're setting up around addressing this issue. And then somehow the issue only gets worse and these people get richer and the tax base gets poorer and everything snowballs. I mean, so
yeah, I think that's, I think that's true. And I think a lot of it is, comes from the fact that we run local government as if it were a mini version of central government, that it's essentially mimicking central government. So you go into town hall and your local select board member who represents, maybe 400 votes, wears the robes of Roman dignity as if they were, as if they were the demigod, right? It's like, come on. I mean, so this part of it is that representation needs to basically forfeit that dignity, to acknowledge they don't really represent anything. Number one, that's not, sorry. Let's not pretend we have a democracy. We have to start by admitting that we don't have one. And so, because if we go in and pretend, oh yes, you're the mayor, you're the, you represent the people, not me, then we're done. It's over. We've already lost, right? So the point is like, no, we need to form a democracy. And the first step is to acknowledge that this really doesn't work. And we need to make it work. But part of making it work is also, I would say, I don't know how Hannah Arendt addresses this. I should check it out. I can't. But that the activity, so first, the form of local government needs to be different from representative government. It needs to be participatory. But second, it also needs to be focused upon not just the laws or on the public sphere, which are roads, fire, police, stuff like that. These are really antiquated things to be focused on. I mean, you could say they're necessary, but I would even contest how necessary they really are in most cases. You have this sort of really old menu of what it is that a local government does that in many parts is the detritus of 2 centuries of being boiled down to that, or that doesn't do anything of any importance other than spend money handed down from state and federal government with mandates attached. And so this kind of infantilized condition of a very limited menu with only snap cards to pay for things where, the card tells you what you can buy with it. You can't think because everything is so nailed down. So the need for, that's why I call it liberty, the need for liberty in that environment, which is that we need to kind of restart. And to restart is, all right, we're forming a democracy here, and we have to figure out what to do. But specifically, we want to acknowledge that no one's here, right? So whoever goes, if it's me, I go down there and there's no one there. I don't want to pretend I'm the democracy. I am the people. I myself alone. That doesn't work. I have to acknowledge that no one's here. And they're not here because there's no reason to be here. There's not. And so what is the reason to be here? And this, I think, is a key step in creating a viable democracy, is that we need material reasons to be there. That is to cross the line of the aesthetic, out of the aesthetic into the material, to say, all right, we need this municipality in order to govern in a manner that will help us survive. And when I say survive, I mean materially. That we need to facilitate cooperation between individuals in ways that just aren't possible in the marketplace. And it doesn't mean the people, the capital P people, of the abstraction of the government, owning everything or taking over the economy, or this sort of Marxist. What it means is crossing the line between the lawmaking, the traditional lawmaking activity and administration of government activities within the municipality, to a facilitation of what you would call private sector activity. And that is to facilitate cooperation between citizens. And this is where the kind of anarchist element comes in, right? This is where I think there's a role. I read a chapter about how, in a sense, if you look at philosophers of participatory democracy, like Benjamin Barber, one of my favorites, who wrote about, deep democracy and like, how are we going to get people to come together and self-govern? And back in the 80s, 90s, he's dead now, but there's a strange kind of omission of economics, of the material world in that discourse. And then conversely, when you go to the anarchists, like Proudhon, one of my favorite thinkers from the middle 19th century, he essentially was oblivious to, and he was focused on how do you he want to create a society based on cooperation and mutualism, to get rid of the nation state, to make everyone basically own their own home, get the banks out of real estate, so that we wouldn't be in this horrible competition, and then essentially have cooperation, voluntary cooperation, civil society. Somewhat utopian. There is no government. There's just, worker cooperatives and municipalities, but not really clear how that works. So in a sense, in the anarchist tradition, there's a denial of the need for democracy at all, for any government. And in the participatory democracy thought, there's a denial of the need for economic cooperation. And it seems to me that they're kind of back to back, each denying the other. And if they would just sort of turn to each other and realize that they're two halves of the same idea, then you'd have the possibility that a municipality could help me, like what I do in energy, could help me own my energy supply, with something which I can't do on my own. If I was wealthy, I could. A few wealthy people can do that. But to say I'm not wealthy, so I need help. And what would the help be? It could be, could be to help me join with other neighbors. Now you would say, well, why don't you just join with your neighbors? Doesn't that sound like a priest waving his finger at you? Why don't you join with your neighbors? You don't need the government to do that. And my answer is, yes, I do. That's exactly what I need my government for. That I need to, if I cooperate with my neighbor, I need to have some kind of facilitation so that we don't get into a big fight. Because the reason I don't cooperate with my neighbors is I'm afraid of them. And you could say, I'm not saying this personally, I think we all, in a way, fear our neighbors. And so it prevents us from cooperating because we don't want to get any trouble, like they say, if you meet your neighbors, don't talk politics, avoid this subject, avoid that, don't get into conflict, but it's like, guess what? Cooperation involves conflict. And so if you can't have conflict safely, you can't cooperate. And these are the moats that sort of separate people and create the marketplace that we live in, where we take services from strangers instead of dealing with our family or friends, because it's safer to do so. The conflict can be resolved in the courts, and I'm not going to, hate my friend from now on because he said something to me when I said, and he took too much of this or that. So I need help to cooperate with my neighbors. I need facilitation. I want to cooperate with them. I would like to share a solar array and some electric cars and a heating system, an underground heating system. But what happens if it breaks? What happens if he doesn't pay his bill? I have to go and threaten him? Or else I lose my property. The bank takes it away because he didn't pay. This is what we don't want to get into, right? And so my view is that this is what government should do. And it isn't, the people should own the power system. You mean the government should own the power system. That's what that means, not the people. The people is me, the person. It's you, each of you. That's people. Government's not people. And so to get out of the double talk of the people and into, no, actually help people. And what's fascinating is if you do that in politics today, you get the attorney general coming in and saying, wait a minute, that's corruption. That word sounds like a priest too, doesn't it? Corruption. That's corruption. That's a very Christian word. It's corruption for the government to help individual people, right? There should be universal rules of government. That's another Christian word, universal. There are all these religious Christian words that fill up our political philosophy, and they isolate us and make us utterly wretched and incompetent at being in a democracy. They make us incapable of liberty, economic liberty, and prevent it from participating in our government. So that's my view, is that we've got to overcome these barriers, and we can only do it locally because otherwise it's not safe. It's very dangerous to have the national government do this, obviously, very dangerous. But to have a town government do it, why not? My view is that that's the area where there can be creativity, experimentation, and there should be a lot of experimentation, and to find to cross that ascetic line into the material world, to use local government for selfish economic well-being, selfish, not selfless, not sacrifice, another religious word. So we should use local democracy for essentially mutualistically co-beneficial, but materially selfish reasons. And that is a formula for participation, that people that would never think of going to the town meeting because it's so stupid and so mediocre and awful to watch and listen to, would actually go. And if people did go, then you would have the people present. And if you did have the people present, which we never have, then something might happen that's real, that's actually democratic and is interesting and not mediocre and depressing.
Yeah, did you have a direction, Bo? Or I was thinking of to drill down on this a little more.
Yeah, I'd like to. Go ahead.
Because it does, as you say, comes down to the people. And I guess, have you ever heard of a character, a sage named Ibn Khaldun, by any chance?
Yeah. Yep.
Because, his idea of the 4 stages, and he says that when you're in the 4th stage, which he calls the age of luxury, that you no longer have any asabiya or social cohesion, that trust in institutions disappear, people in positions of power make decisions based on their own wealth and their own self-interest, because any idealism around the collective is gone because there hasn't been enough mutual suffering. That's basically his argument. And then I think of Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer, one of his arguments is that we all walk around like sleepwalkers, and we're just filled up with all this received knowledge and opinion from our culture and from religion and from family and from media and from politics and all this stuff. And he says, we need a shock. We need a shock. And that's what a great teacher is, to wake us up out of this sleepwalking thing. And a lot of the things you're describing sound to me like that sleepwalking. And I'm wondering, do you think nature kind of has guardrails and that it's going to send us a shock? That, because I always fantasize, well, when will my community work together? When it has to, because all the stuff that is put outside of itself, all these dependencies outside of itself, when they finally fail them, which, 20 years ago, people said, Brian, you're crazy. Now, about 10 years ago, they stopped saying I was crazy. But so what about the person? Is that have we developed enough to really become interdependent, or are we still kind of adolescent, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to that. Um, there's also, though, the tradition of of the of waiting for crisis, for change to occur. And I think in some ways it's we kind of oscillate between those two positions. We'll never do anything until we have a crisis, and then we have a crisis, and very often the crisis just makes things worse. People do not become conscious and more cooperative. Instead, in the crisis we're in now, my sense is that we're generally, and I feel it myself, a kind of diminution of consciousness where I really don't know what to do. It's just feel helpless. And in terms of what's going on, in the spectacle of politics, that the worse it gets, the less able I feel to do anything about it. And so that's sort of I guess the question is, would catastrophe bring us together? And should we wait for that? I guess my belief is we really need to deal with it. The crisis is already here. I mean, the level of destruction is so terrible. And then, whether measured in species, decline or in the condition of humans, the condition of humans is really the degradation of humanity that has occurred. It's pretty alarming. So it's sort of like, at what point do we declare a crisis? And if we wait too long, does it even matter that we declared it, right? That it's like, it's too late. And so it seems to me we're there already. I am. I mean, that's why, I guess, why I wrote the book, or been, it was just that I'm done, with national political spectacle, with the elections, with the parties. I really could care less about it. And I think part of the, um, I think, in a sense, unless we peel ourselves away from that system, as long as we regard it as important, we're finished. It is a jail. It's a mental jail. It's also an addiction, and it's an addiction that is serviced. It's a subsidized drug. National elections. And we've all become addicted to it, and we need to observe what it's done to our minds, which is that we sit around talking about the president all day. And the president is not, nor has ever been, the government of the United States. Has never been, is not. And so the fact that we're talking about someone who is not the government all day really tells us what's happened to us, which is that we're essentially in a religious panic, and we're having really fanatical kind of hysteria, and in various ways having sectarian crises and conflicts, but we're not participating in politics in any way when we do that. That it's not political, it's not enlightened, and it just cannot be. So if we could just let go of that, and then try to reconceive what it means to be political, and refocus our hope, our aspiration, in another place, I think that's sort of the first step. And I do think that if we don't do that now, we're never going to do it. Because, I mean, we're already putting up with Trump, right? We're putting up with a complete and utter absurdity
It,
every day
it
now.
sounds like
It's
education is really the first step, right?
education. Well, I mean, again, it's another catch-22. It's like, when does education begin? You know, so, yeah, I mean, it's education, yes, in the sense that thought must precede action, that we can't just act because we don't know what to do. And it's not obvious what to do. You know, in the 1890s and up to 1910, a lot of these anarchists became fascists, and a lot of the rest of them became terrorists. So these guys are going around just blowing up cafes, you know, like randomly, just everyone's my enemy, bourgeois society. I'm done with you all. I'm just going to kill you all and rob you until I die. And literally, there was a movement of people called the illegalists who did this. And it went on for, 15 years or so. They were going around killing people, blowing things up. And they were just blowing up politicians, or, they would just randomly blow things up and randomly rob people. And just like they became these sort of natural born killers. They became Bonnie and Clydes. They just became nihilists,
Yeah,
political
chaos
nihilists.
machines. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we've already been through this. It's very old. Like you were saying, a lot of the ideas are old. The crisis is old, but what's not old is the um, the extent of it, right? Where we now have this incredible collapse of all the ecological systems, a collapse of cultural systems. We have totalitarianism rising. We have the public opinion divided into two, I would say, incredibly fanatical factions that are impervious to reason or discourse. Each one considering the other one to be completely insane, but they're both insane as far as I could tell. And just with different delusions. They have conflicting delusions, but they're essentially the same in terms of their psychology and their attachment to national politics, and their utter categorical neglect of their own physical worlds. And so it seems to me that we're at the crisis point, and it is already catastrophic. And so it's not a bad time to think about this. Like, could we, like,
I,
it's not a bad time. Now is not such a bad time.
I was going to ask a similar question to Brian's, but it's got a slightly different tilt on it, which is, you know, something like half of people are below average in whatever category.
Yeah.
And education was mentioned. I think there's probably agreement here that education to a large extent, both you know um, primary and um, college and beyond, both because of the specialization you mentioned earlier, but also because of ideology, or because of lack of resource, or because of all kinds of issues, is education is lacking.
Right.
So suddenly flipping the switch on, okay, everybody go pursue liberty and democracy in your local government, figure out how to cooperate. Um, what do you imagine implementation could possibly look like?
Well, that's where I give the case in the book of what I've done for the last 30 years. And that was just an example, I think. And that was like kind of what I had in mind, because I'd come out of this whole discussion about 19th century left-wing thought, post-war thought, resistance movement. I was rejecting resistance and saying we've got to do something back in the 1990s, not just resist power. You eventually lose, because all you're doing is resisting someone who has all the power. Therefore, they're going to win. Eventually, it's just a matter of time. So the question is what to do. And for me, it was, okay, well, the first thing you got to do is reconceive what municipalities should do. What is like, and so one example is to deal with the energy crisis, right? And so because the energy is generally under federal regulation and state regulation, municipalities have very little to do with energy. They, have a little bit to do, but not very much. They issue franchise agreements to the utilities. They issue permits to interconnect with the grid, and that's about it. Some municipalities have conform municipal utilities, but this is from the days of basically the last days of socialism. It has hardly happened since World War II. It's not in the cards. So how do you create a new form, which is not socialism, which is not the people, the government owning everything, a new form, which is focused on benefiting people and benefiting the environment, allowing a mastery of technology and a change of technology, a localization of technology. So I had to think these things through for years and years. I had to figure out what the opportunity was and write these laws that, for first these community choice aggregation laws that are now pretty widespread, that allow municipalities to control their source of energy to their community. And then I wrote another authority, and this has had to be adopted by local city governments. They had to go through a local process of coming up with a plan and have public hearings and involve people. And so I write this whole in the book, the story of how it progressed, because I was coming at it pretty naively as a young man. And so I thought, oh, you just create this power. People can control their energy and they'll do it. And then they'll form democracy and make decisions about energy democracy. And I realized within 4 or 5 years that no, they won't. The corporations take over. They outsource it to some company. They financialize the whole thing. So ultimately it's just a different bunch of billionaires that provide the supply, and everything that's supposedly green ends up being a piece of paper with a state stamp on it, renewable energy certificate. Really dissatisfied. So it's like, okay, start over again, around the late 1990s, and wrote another version where the government would actually control the supply. They wouldn't just go out shopping for supply. They would build their own supply. So I wrote a revenue bond authority, which was allowed them to finance their own supply. And I wrote a new law that allowed them to directly negotiate with generators instead of going to financial middlemen. So they were dealing directly with generators. They're getting all the data so they could see everything they were doing, and they were financing their own assets. And then what happened, this was 10 years later, when they succeeded, they formed these bureaucracies. And I realized, okay, so these horrible bureaucracies where, government entities would form, and now some of them are run like CEOs that are making $700K a year at these things, right? They're paid 3 times what the governor of California is paid. Some of the ones in California, I mean, $700,000 a year to run a community energy program. And so it's the bureaucratic problem. This is where I started becoming aware. There's the market, and then there's bureaucracy. And we have this false debate that says, which one do you like better? Would you rather have, the billionaire or the bureaucrat that's overpaid? These are your 2 options, right? The or the market. It's false. So, this was a profound disillusionment, disappointment. At the same time, it succeeded. It was huge. They've built $50 billion of renewable energy in California, this new model, as of last month. It's a huge amount of change and innovation. They're doing all this innovation. So it's not a failure, but they got people running them for $700,000 a year, and people are not really going to meetings, and it's still quite bureaucratic. And so I've been working for the past 10 years on a new version that sort of adds a new layer, which is to have the energy users be the owners of the system and have the municipality facilitate their ownership. Well, as I was describing about how I'd like to have the town help me own my energy, right? And to refine it. So, it's like it's experimentation. It isn't this a priori, I know exactly what to do programmatically across. I don't. But just this experimentation in local democracy, because it has 2 effects. One is that you develop all this literacy in the community that was not there before. There are now literally tens of thousands of people in California, mostly young people, who used to know nothing about energy, and now they live it, right? So that's important, because they're into it. They go to the meetings, they're all, So that's really important. But then also what you get is an alignment with the municipality, where the municipality is sort of converted to a kind of progressive thought, which otherwise it would never have. So you get the cities at the state legislature coming and they're sending their attorneys in there and representing what they're doing in the legislature. and saying, we're better than you. And they're better, right? They're better than the state regulator and the utility and all the state agencies that run. They're way beyond them in terms of renewable energy and, decarbonization. They're just better. So now the cities are showing up in the state legislatures with this better thing. And it starts changing the dynamic at the state level. And you get a dialectic, I think, there where there's like, this is culture. This is what really culture is. As opposed to just, mechanisms in markets, which are not culture. They annihilate culture. They destroy memory. They prevent participation, and they discourage learning, and they disempower. But this sort of experimentation, the municipal level, it has memory, it has culture, it has participation, it has legal representation, and ultimately, even the elected officials begin to sort of mimic it and believe in it. And so, like I said, I'm not trying to destroy representation. I understand this system exists. I don't think it's logical to try to get rid of it, but I do think it's logical to represent or to recognize that it is futile and meaningless, that it itself is nothing. It is a machine that has no content and no memory and no culture. It has to be provided that, and that what we used to call society or culture actually needs democracy to exist. But democracy isn't representative. And so it's just this other space, which is neither strictly private nor strictly public. And the crossing over between the two is an essential element of its coming to life. That if they're separated, if they're kept separate, the way our system has kept them separate, it's dead. One is totally disempowered, and the other one has power. One is meaningful and powerless. The other one is powerful and meaningless. So we have this is the term articulate unmeaning. You might have heard the term articulate unmeaning. The articulate unmeaning of power. And so the separation of meaning from power is really the problem, because the lawyers become very cynical and meaningless, and the people become very childish and poetic. And so they wax on in the street. They have all their imagination. They invent music. Our generation's obsessed with music. I've become convinced that our obsession with music is actually Cold War ideology. We were reduced to music. We were put in a cage of music, where only music is the only place we could find meaning. Everywhere else we went was this awful vacuum chamber that did not allow meaning. And so it's the separation that's the problem, that both things exist. We don't need to destroy them, but we need to cross over. And there's a kind of
that separation that you're talking about is the formula to ensure that nothing changes. Fair to say?
I think so. I think it's in a way that the remnant of the check and balance system that says this is a firewall, meaning over here, power over there. And so this idea of a system of laws, not men, which I reference in the book, that we have this ideal, right? That if you look at our architecture, they have the places where the Greeks had the gods on top of the column. We have nothing. We have the little naves in the building where there used to be a statue. There's no statue. It's empty. And that was the idea of the founders, right? We don't want a nation of men or a system of men, because that means personal power to them. That meant the king. That meant the aristocrat. But the problem is that it also means that the people have no power. And so who does? And the answer is, we don't even know who they are. The people that run the political parties, they have it, and we don't know their names. So they pretend that they pretend they don't exist. It's all laundered. So we live in this sort of lie of representation, and it makes us into fools. It makes us into idiots. And it frightens me, actually, because I'm describing myself, not everyone else. I feel like I've been an idiot much of my life. Right? And I sit around talking about Trump all day, and it just disgusts me. In my family, we talk about how disgusting it is. We sit around talking about this because it's nothing. It's just nothing.
Were you cooking something, Bo?
I can be.
Okay.
I'm still um I'm still trying to so I guess there's a gumption piece here, right? There's like okay, if somebody in some critical mass of municipalities started writing laws, and maybe specifically about energy, because if your premise is correct that you know energy as the basis for economy is kind of where there's leverage, y- you know um then that does the first thing, but there's still this like seemingly really long process ahead of that, or I'm sorry, after that, about engaging people. Like, I live in Philadelphia. Like, imagining a city of, I think it's 1.5 million people suddenly turning its attention to engage in local politics in any significant way. Not just engage in it, but use the mechanisms of local politics to experiment and try to do things differently. It's just
Mhm.
really hard to imagine, which doesn't mean it's the wrong answer. So,
Mhm.
but I'm still having trouble visualizing what it looks like. And on the other hand, I'm still struggling with whether this is more fundamentally a mechanical problem relating to local government, or a spiritual problem, or collective psychological problem relating to, like, let's say, solving some of the other big issues, like the breakdown of the nuclear family, or or breakdown of community in general. Might local political engagement result from building community around some other um, centerpiece? Like, and maybe this is an example of local politics to you, but Brian and I have kicked around the idea before of um, trying to source more food locally, right?
Yeah.
Food also being an energy source. So it touches on a couple of your points, but it doesn't
Mhm.
involve going to a city council meeting or writing a law so much as trying to um, address a core need, and it happens to do it in a way that might engage community differently from the fragmentation we see today. So, is that an example of local politics, or do you or are you calling for something more specific? And how do you kind of see the stack of w- what is the root issue, and um not that there's a root issue, but it seems like with the manifesto, you're going for what you think is fundamental. And I guess I'm not convinced. I think it's super interesting, but I'm not convinced it's fundamental. Like, if we instead focused on local food production, might we not potentially generate um, local engagement more holistically?
I think so. In fact, we have a local farming project here of some along similar lines to what you described, but which does involve legislation. And food is super important. I didn't pick energy because the main reason I picked energy was because it was the hardest thing to change that there is. Not because it's more important than food, but because it's bigger, more destructive, more concentrated in ownership, more protected by government. It's the largest industrial sector, largest cause of pollution, largest cause of war. It's just this core massive thing. So I figure if I could change energy, that would sort of prove something, like you can do this. And I think you can change food. And food, and it's more meaningful to people in their daily lives. And I think it's and the relationship, the having a relationship to nature, which is really what food is, culturally, I think is a really critical element in addressing the cultural, like you were describing, the collapse of the family, of community. It's really top of it's definitely top three or something. You know what I mean? For me, it's like energy, food. Then there's things like insurance, right? I mean, there are other things that are really important to people that are really screwed up in our system, Like you get sick, you're going to die, you
or
need tons of money.
healthcare, more to the
Healthcare,
point.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But also just like financial services, frankly, that it's healthcare, but it's also who pays for it and how does it work financially. And if the financial model is still, an insurance company, then the caregiver doesn't really decide the nature of the service. It's the financial entity. And so in a way they kind of, to address one, you have to address the other. And I think with food, the issue is, how do you change food itself per se? Like in the same sense that when I started doing my energy work 30 years ago, people used to say, why don't you just get solar panels? Like, why don't we just get solar in the city? It's like, well, I want to get solar in the city, but I want to change energy. I want to actually displace the industry that provides energy. And so it doesn't exist anymore the way that it did. And instead, something new exists. And to do that, you need leverage. And I would say in food, you need leverage as well. I don't understand it as well, but I have put a lot over the years thought into, what would you do with food? How would you change food at the local level? And so, in fact, years ago, I wrote a mayoral platform for the mayor of Oakland, and one of the items in there was to have how do you leverage a regional food economy? That's really what you're talking about when you say like bring food. And how do you leverage it? Because food markets are super predatory and difficult on the farmer. The middlemen control the market. The farmers are paid nothing. Consumers are overpriced. At this point, supermarkets are charging rent on their shelves. So you have this bizarre economy, where when you go buy food, you're actually, you know, the shelf is being rented, to so you have this financialization that defines the face of food. And farmers markets, obviously, there's a long-standing, tradition. I'm sure Philadelphia has great farmers markets, and we have them here, and yeah. Yeah, so they've died. The recent years, farmers markets have failed, and CSAs, community support agriculture, another structure invented to support farmers, also failing in New England, failing, and because you have all this sort of turn toward, buying your food at Walmart, and people can't afford the food, and the organics industry built essentially a premium industry like solar, premium. Rich people get solar, rich people get organics. And that had political consequences, which is widespread public resentment of solar energy and organic farming. So
Yeah.
they lose political support. So, like, how do you set up a structure like like what I did with aggregation, where everybody's in it together? It's not about just the few who are educated getting the better food, the few are educated, having access to these new ideas. How do you do it so it's the whole system? How do you change the whole system? So I believe with food is you need an alliance of the municipal government of big cities. And I work mostly in the city of San Francisco, not as big as Philly, but almost 1 million people. And it's big city politics. It's central democratic politics. So I had to deal with very difficult politics to do what I did in San Francisco. And I do think there's always this thing of like, it's harder to do it in a big city because of the politics, but it's harder to do it in small towns because they have no resources. So you're either dealing with politics or no resources, and it's always a problem. Somehow, it's always the same difficulty. So I think big cities are in a way where it's at with this stuff because they do have resources, and then they waste resources immensely, I would say. But with food, there's several ideas. One that I came up with is for Jerry Brown. My wife and I ran Jerry Brown's campaign for mayor when he first ran for mayor of Oakland. And for a while, we were kind of running the mayor's office until he decided he was not going to be progressive, and we left. He abandoned his progressive agenda back in 1999 or 2000. So we left. But for a time, we were trying to do all these really progressive things in Oakland, where I'm from. I'm born in Oakland. And so one of them was to have several steps. First, have all the city departments and public schools buy their food from regional organic farms. So you get a basic flow of revenue to the farmers going to institutions. And then dedicate free land for 24/7 markets in the city of Oakland. Free spaces, no charge. So the farmers can come in, don't have to pay to sell their food in the middle of the city. And then try to assist farmers with their fights against development, which threatens regional farms. Basically, establish an alliance between city governments that want access to the food and farmers that are generally in the exurbs, like beyond the suburbs, and being encroached upon by suburban municipalities. An alliance between the big city government and the farmers themselves to try to stop that dynamic, to protect the farms, give them business, give them advantages within the city, to leverage a change like that. So, that was like, so I do think there's a role for law and policy in that, for leverage, because that's what you get with legislation. Is you get leverage, you also get memory, you get societal sort of penetration and awareness, consciousness, meaning. So it isn't just a niche market. It isn't just, in Oakland, it was for a time, Alice Waters, from Chez Panisse, the fancy restaurant, Chez Panisse, Alice Waters, she started the best restaurant probably in America. It's an incredible restaurant, but it's, $300 a meal kind of restaurant. But she decided she wanted to do this really idealistic thing back in the 90s, actually. Well, in the 80s, she tried to bring a farmer's market to downtown Oakland, and she was fought against by the Black community, who regarded it as an elitist invasion. And it was driven out. And then in the 90s, she persuaded the Berkeley public schools to source really good food and to change their kitchens from this sort of fast food format into real cooking format. And it went on for about 10 years. It was when I lived there in Berkeley last. And it was a really impressive endeavor. They changed it. They literally had to train all the workers in all the public schools to actually cook, because they don't do that, right? They put it in the steamer or the microwave, whatever, stick it. So first it was a union issue because the workers didn't want to cook. You think, well, what's the matter with you? Answer is, I don't like to work, right? I'm a depressed person that works in a school. And so we don't work. Did no one tell you that? So they had to basically be strong-armed into cooking again. And eventually they did it. Okay, we'll cook. And they had to retool the kitchens. And this took years. So they started cooking. And the news actually was food in the schools. Now the problem was the students didn't like the food. And they could not solve this problem because the students are all being fed junk food at home. So you have kids from the ghetto going to the school and getting Chez Panisse, and they don't like it. They want the Mickey D's. And so you get this like, oh my God, like there's nothing to be done. It's just completely untenable. And they shut it down. The whole thing was shut down because the students protested against their good food. So you do have these insane, and it's really discouraging. It brings you back to a churchly view that's just about the human soul. And I concede that. And whenever I go into, local politics, I always feel this. It's like, I feel like I'm just crazy and it's a horror show. And why am I here? I'm just an idiot. I'm a idiot savant wandering around town hall thinking he's going to do something. But I have found that you can get things passed through law. When it's law, it causes reification. Reification is that an idea becomes a thing to people. It goes from, oh, you said this, you said that, to it exists. Oh, miracle, it exists. Once it exists, then they just accept it on the face of it. And then it replicates. It's like, I think that's why we have democracy, that on some level, it's the origin of culture is that that primitive peoples are democratic. And it's through the action of having power, sharing it with others, that learning happens in memory and tradition, and that's why we have it. And to the extent that we've gotten rid of it and standardized it, industrialized it, that we've lost it. And so we really need to write laws. And in addition, but the laws need to not only be about laws. So I agree, the law itself is inadequate, that the law has to cross over into the material, into the economic. And if we do that at the local level, then essentially we are returning to a primitive state where we're just making decisions about how we are going to live. And that is, I think, is a complete kind of set in terms of having both the social dimension, which I agree with, like, let's just get some food in the city, let's make this happen. We don't have to be the government. It can't just be the government. Government itself is a sterile mechanism. But on the other hand, the people alone, just in their market activity, in their consumption activity, and buying things, is very ephemeral. It's very vulnerable. It's fits and starts. It's based on enthusiasm. It appears and disappears. It can't win battles. And so it's ultimately always defeated. That's why I always hate it when they say the people united will never be defeated. It's the opposite of the truth. It is not true. We have been defeated, completely and utterly annihilated. And so we need to recognize how vulnerable we are, and that we need the law, you know what I mean, to leverage our position. It's not that the law matters. It's not. It doesn't. But we need it. It's necessary, but not adequate. And but together, the two together cause this accumulation. And so, like this, like I said, the aggregations in California now, it's 250 cities, it's 20 million people, and they've built $50 billion of stuff. And that's permanent. Those will exist for basically until California is destroyed. They'll never go away, because the government is a machine. It causes reproduction. It just goes click, 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 click. It's this clock, and it just keeps going and going until somebody stops it. It will not stop. And so if you build up cultural accumulation with the support of that apparatus, it immortalizes it. It makes it repeat and renew and repeat and renew and correct and repeat and correct and repeat. And, just it ensures its longevity and encrusts it in the real, as far as what's revealed to the people as the real. And I think it's quite powerful. And like I said, I mean, in the book, I was able to do it without really money or much organizational support. So I found that local democracy is an open door. The institution it's an empty room covered with, graffiti and defecation and filth. But the door is open. And because there's no one in that room, it's actually pretty easy to pass laws. And so that part of it is much more easy than people think. Looking at mass politics, which is so completely impenetrable, so totally closed, you can't do anything, unless you're a billionaire or whatever, or you run an NGO. It's just incredibly depressing to even think about doing anything in that world. But City Hall, not that way. And to the extent that City Hall is involved, then that opens the state. That opens the state legislature. And so I've been able to pass laws in the state legislature, but it was because I had some cities behind me and local officials that would help and intercede and push. And it would sort of accumulate over time, because they're all in this competition against each other. So you get into their game, and some of them take on your colors, and they start to claim it and put it up and put it up. So they become your interlocutors. They're repeating and advertising what you're doing. And defending you in the legislature. So you get this dynamic, and the more I kind of got into it, I realized this is cultural. This is this thing that accumulates. And so I can just go away, and it doesn't go away. I left California. It keeps going. I'm just watching now. It's kind of magnificent. And it really is that is democracy. But the way I ended up describing it in the book is that democracy is the action of anarchy upon representation. That representation itself is nothing. Anarchy is just this kind of crazy, like you were saying, the word, I don't know, Bo, what you said, the word, but it was sort of like hubris or gumption. But it's like, it's just an individual. It's somebody with an idea. It's like you with your food idea. And you decide, well, I'm gonna do it. And my view is that when we talk about the people, that is the people. That the people isn't a single person with an idea that decides to do it. It's also, that is anarchy. That's anarchy. But anarchy that's applied, that is essentially, that acts upon representation, that goes in and pushes itself into representation. It doesn't change or take over or destroy representation, but representation can't really resist it very well. It's not impenetrable by it. And so it's just that nobody's doing it. We've been shut off, and we've been turned into just watching the spectacle, and confusing criticism for participation and voting for participation. We've just been pacified. I'm describing myself here. Even though I did what I did, I still have these qualities too that everyone, in my view, has, which is I watch and I talk incessantly, have dreams about the president. All this is like, I come to realize that's insane. These people they're nothing. I mean, our presidents are despicable, empty vessels of nothingness. And so the fact that we watch them is the most horrible travesty that we're watching this. It's terrible. It's mesmerism. And so I think if we could sort of like get out of that and just like return to physical being, here I am, here are my feet, there's my house, down the street. I go down there. What do I want to do? I'm going to do my food thing. Let's do the food thing. And if we could just sort of wake up into that, but make it political, make it like not just me, not just my neighbors, but no, we're going to do this the whole city, And if the state won't let us, we're going to change the state law and just like do it. And I mean, it worked. You know what I mean? So the book is trying to show, like, not just I think it can work, it did work. And I'm not some kind of political genius. I don't have really many friends either. So it isn't like I have friends in powerful places. And I had a few that helped me in different times, but not that much really. Not really. And I didn't get that much out of it personally, but it was satisfying and it was reassuring. And it gave me be able to write the book and not feeling like I was just theorizing.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on your success in California.
Absolutely.
It's impressive. I think I'm wanting to go back to the beginning,
Okay.
because there's like a metaphysics that I think you've spoken to some, but we haven't made fully explicit yet. And it has to do with some of the words that you say that I sense have a capital letter at the beginning. And I don't know what the complete set of those is, but liberty and democracy for sure. I think culture. I think, in the last um, couple of mini chapters of conversation here, you've referred to culture as an accumulation, and you've referred to memory and making things real, and kind of like there's like an amalgam there that I sense has meaning for you beyond what's been said so far.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if we could take a swing at a question like, you know, how, how does this work, the Localist Manifesto, reflect your most up-to-date understanding of how the world works? Like what's most important about this? Is that okay to ask, or do I need to like dial it in more?
I think I get the question. Yeah, I think it goes back to the idea of democracy, maybe in the ancient world, uh, for the Greeks or the Romans, which is a pretty simple world. The big questions are go to war, not go to war, famine, there's a famine, there's certain things that would happen, you have to deal with it. And so therefore that democracy in that world is about judgment. It's judging yes or no, good or evil, enemy, friend, judgment. But in our world, the man-made world, the complexity level is exponentially greater. And so it's an epistemological world. We have to know things. And we have to be able to learn things. When I say we, I don't mean the abstract we any more than the abstract the people, but we as in a democracy, in any form, good or bad, real or unreal, have to be able to evaluate things like PFAS, like forever chemicals. What is it? Well, how did this happen? what is going on. It's getting into the landfills, being put through the waste treatment plants, it's going into the rivers, it's going into the soil, goes into the crops, it's retained. And what is it for? For no-stick pans, for lipstick. It's like, what the hell? And the more you study it, but it's also in semiconductors, and it's just everything. How did this happen? Who approved this? That's just one thing. And you have 10,000 of these things. And so we have, in other words, democracy needs to be epistemological. It needs to be a learning process. And it needs to also be a knowledge creation process. Because if it's only a learning process, then it's defense. The market brings it to us, and then we answer yes or no, good or bad. But no, this is, what do we want to do? Not just how do we receive what the market does, what do we want to do? Not the market, we. And it's not like governments today, a lot of municipalities, they just think, oh, well, is there a developer wants to build in our town? Yes or no? Not what do we want to build in our town? That's not on the menu. And so for me, I guess that's that crossing that line that says we don't need to do this. We don't need to be in the passive role of the judge, thumbs up or thumbs down. We need to be in a positive, proposive, idea-based role that both can learn from what is known, evaluate, and then come up with actually new ideas. Like what I did in energy, it was a new idea. It wasn't out there that was just adopted or copied. It was an idea. And the green bonds was an idea. That was just an idea. It was an idea. It was something new to do that the government would initiate. It wasn't initiated by the market. It wasn't banks coming to the city and saying, you should do this, which is normally what it is, right? It's the financial institutions, it's the big capitalists. So anything that they actually do usually is from them. And we need to actually think of things to do that, and you think, God, I mean, in my own mind, I think, you think that the little people are going to be able to do that? Isn't that, it's like, well, I'm a little person. And it seems to me there are a lot of very intelligent people. The issue is like you were saying, half of the people are below average. Yeah, I agree that not only that half of the people are below average, but there are a lot of very stupid people and a lot of very ignorant people, and nothing is going to change that for a long time. So I would never claim the contrary. I don't, for me, that's the thing. I didn't have majority support. I had to go several times to the ballot and won at the ballot. So that did have to happen because the utilities attacked what I was doing once. And I had to defend against it, and did. But people voted against the utilities measure back in 2010 to kill what I was doing in California. And then I had to put up a thing on the ballot for this green bond authority was on the ballot, and the people had to approve that. So there's 2 times that people had to approve it, and they did. So that was involved, and it was points at which I did depend upon the voting majority to vote in their own interests and to understand it. But part of the reason that I won, and without any money against, PG&E spent $67 million for their measure, and I raised $100,000 against it and won. But the reason is that what I was doing was they were chasing after what we were doing. They were trying to stop what we were doing, and that put them at this enormous disadvantage, which I only understood by doing it. I understood because I came to realize part of the reason that the corporations dominate government is they're always ahead of the government. They're always the ones driving the next thing. They're the ones planning next year's initiative this year. They know in advance what they're going to do. The government has no idea what it's doing tomorrow. And so the corporations always dominate in all the discussions. They manage it and dominate it. But in this case, I'd gotten ahead of them. And it made them frantic and hysterical. So, because they're not used to that. They're not geniuses. They just have money. So if they fall behind, 100 guys can't run faster than one guy, right? So they're all running behind you. And it just made them incompetent, is my view. And so that they screwed up. And as a result, we won. And there's this great advantage to being ahead. One step ahead, kind of like a chess game. You get one step. Once you get one step ahead of a guy in a chess game, he's chasing you the whole game. And Not always. You can obviously go the other way, but it's kind of a pattern, I would say. And I think that the idea of positive dialectics, which I've developed over the years, it's also in the book, the idea of versus negative dialectics, which is the core kernel concept of resistance theory, of resisting power, is reactionary. It's reacting to another power, which means they're ahead always, and you're always resisting them as they push into the future. In this case, I got the future. They're trying to stop it, and it was really quite funny. I mean, they couldn't stop it. They just couldn't, and they couldn't think about it. They couldn't. It was outside their gambit to be having to do this. It was like they weren't used to it. And anyway, so I think it was this huge advantage, and that's where democracy is. It doesn't require everyone to know. It just requires someone to know, and that's why I say intellectual leadership is a really important part of real democracy, and another real sticking point in democratic theory, because you have, like the Occupy movement, this phobia toward leadership. And of course, they should be phobic toward political leadership, toward representation. I would say absolutely, yes. Don't have elected officials come to your rallies. I agree. But that's not leadership. They don't lead. They use a word that they never do. Leadership is intellectual, and it's spontaneous, and it's unqualified. Anyone can do that. It can be any class, any race, any income. You can never tell how smart somebody is until they talk. And so leadership is a thing that should be profoundly desired and encouraged, but it has to be contradistinguished with representation, officialdom, and certification, and licenses, and degrees, and all this stuff, and which is bureaucracy. And so it's like, if we could do that, then it comes back down to a Socratic dialogue, even though Socrates is anti-democratic, but into like, who is making sense here? Can we think this through and open up the discourse so that others can take shots and can compete and can criticize? And, because believe me, I had to undergo incredible amounts of criticism and attack, and, because I wasn't qualified. I didn't have any qualifications. I had no credential to do what I did. And so people were saying, like, why? Several times it was said in public hearings, why is it we're doing it just because he says we should do it? Like, literally objecting, just like, who the hell's this guy? Why are we listening to him? Why? What's going on here? Like, a profound objection. Who the hell is this guy? And, it's like, well, what? I mean, what's your problem, dude? What do you know? And it's just, come on. I mean, governance, we have to be able to think our way through things. And it sounds so simple, but we've stopped doing that in representative government. Instead, it's this pretended expert ping pong, where they really just reproduce the status quo, compulsively overbill for it, pretend they're doing something, control all the discourse. Nothing ever happens. Or if it does happen, it's bad because someone makes lots of money off it. And we pretend that's better than the anarchy of individuals in discourse coming forward and pursuing ideas. And I just think we've been taught to fear that, the same way that Hitler has been used to make us fear our thoughts, pretending that fascism was a result of public ideological passion, which it was not at all. The idea that Nazism was a passionate movement is the opposite of the truth. It was a pacification of the population. It was not a crusade. It was not a pogrom. It was orchestrated, bureaucratic, technological phenomenon. And the idea that we should fear ideology, that it will cause fascism, is the opposite of the truth. It was the selling out of Marxist ideology that led to the mass disillusionment before World War I. After that was a free fall, and there was no ideology. It was a vacuum of ideology and a loss of any moral sense at all that defined that period. And we're in that place now where we're afraid of ideology. We think that ideology is the danger, but Trump has no ideology. The Democratic Party has no ideology. Neither party has any ideology. It's pure manipulation. They don't believe, except for Rand Paul, all right? There's like 2 members of Congress that actually have an opinion. there's one or two Republicans, one or two Democrats, neither of whom are regarded as viable candidates for anything. And because they have opinions, I know that because I work in politics, and that's a major objection to anyone. I worked with, Dennis Kucinich. I worked with, on and off. Tom Ammiano in San Francisco was a really important part of what I did there. Jerry Brown, all these guys that were like weirdos who actually had ideas, and they're reviled by the parties. They're hated. So it's the absence of so-called ideology. The word ideology which come to mean, this bad thing, but whose original meaning is simply, um, basically means having an idea. You know what I
Studying
mean?
it.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
ooh.
Well,
So like I call it
narrative has
idiophobia.
replaced ideology, hasn't it?
Narrative, exactly. Like it's all mesmerism, it's all marketing, and it's all lying, right? It's all basically BS. As opposed to, no, what about like what we should do? And what about what's true or not true? And don't we need to figure this out? I mean, shouldn't we be capable of it? And that's sort of what I try to raise in the book. Like, if we're not capable of it, then why all this effrontery? Why do we keep, either we do it or we don't? And if we don't do it, we shouldn't pretend that we do it or that anyone else should do it. In which case, nothing wrong with China or Russia. We're no better than them. Let them
Do you
have their
think,
dictatorship. I mean,
have we turned a corner? Do you think it's inevitable that eventually we do it and that they're playing a delaying game? Is it our fate to do it eventually? Is this the fulfillment of an evolution that we finally get through all of this and that we win over the evil rhetoricians, which is what I keep coming back to, the evil rhetorician?
I really couldn't answer that one, Brian. That's a pretty deep question. Seems to be, I'm a believer in contingency. I think it goes where it goes. And it really is kind of up to us. I mean that literally.
Right.
that
Yeah,
that
yeah.
it's just there is no order, and it's just like, can we, any one of us, all of us, can we?
Well, that's why we're all here, is to try to at least, have the conversations, because dialogue seems to be an important part of it, and instead of rhetoric, basically.
Right, and marketing and all that propaganda.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was interested in digging out a little more. You mentioned one of my great heroes, E.F. Schumacher, in Small is Beautiful. And, he mentions in that book a definite agenda on the part of the corporate state to kind of alter the context of people's relationship to place. Like my dad worked for IBM, so I moved every 3 years. And Schumacher says, this is so that nobody develops any loyalty to place. They develop loyalty to the corporation. So they don't care about the hospital or the library or the opera or the symphony, because they're going to be gone in 3 years anyway, because place is just a niche, another rung on the ladder to get to somewhere else that's better than this place. And so that we've created a bunch of places nobody cares about because everybody's on a station to go somewhere else. Their Barbie Malibu beach house or whatever their fantasy world is. And so that it brings a new profundity to the idea of be here now.
Oh, totally. No, I think placelessness. I've got there's a chapter on location neutrality and placelessness in the book. So I fully subscribe to that. Ivan Illich wrote about it as well.
And
His
mobility is the other half of that.
Yeah, that its mobility causes inequity, right? That that and but Schumacher might have captured it better in the sense that it affects not just your economic status, which is Illich's focus, but that it changes your loyalty, that it changes their values, your valorization. What do you think is of high value, low value? And we've struggled with it actually with our sons, because they want, we farm and they want to stay on the farm, but success at their age is defined by going, right? Go. If you don't go, then somehow you're a failure. You're incomplete. You should have gone. Why didn't you go somewhere? Get away from your family. Speaking of the death of the family, that you can't be yourself unless you leave. And
Like
yeah,
the
it's
Amish Wanderjahr, their Wanderjahr, is it, or something like that, where the Amish, they go away for a year and they get to decide whether they want to come back or not.
well, there might be something to that, but our system is just go away, period, right? And so I went off to college, and my wife went off to college. That's how we met, and I think there's a huge, much of the middle class are people who went away. And that's sort of how you make it, because you can get into a better school if you apply to a dozen schools like I did and go to the best one you get into, no matter where it is. And if same with a job, you get a better job if you apply anywhere, and you'll go anywhere to take the job versus if you want to take it in, within distance of reach of your home. And you have a slim pickings. You have to compete against everyone, including those from far away coming here to compete against you. So you get this. So I think it may very well have originally been, a corporate strategy, or I tend to think that it's so widespread in the ethos of our society at this point that it doesn't even need that it's just the way everyone is and thinks. And
Well,
I
you're
do
going to
think
go
that,
back. Are you going to go back to a tract house in Levittown? I mean, going back to the farm has something to it, something almost spiritual to it, that a tract house in Levittown is just not going to muster the romance, I don't think, and that was all part of that movement too.
yeah, no, there's a lot to that. That's probably where we got some land, so there'd be something to come back to. But yeah, it's a quite painful thing. I think it's really what's hollowed out communities, and created these, like a lot where I live here. Probably the average age is 65, 70 years old. The young people are all gone, and not much of an economy. Not much of community. It's difficult for those who stay behind. It's a kind of voluntary refugees of a sort. Um,
Mhm.
and I think the way it does, it conditions us to an abstract existence attached to symbols, where I mean, back in the religious days, that would be attachment to what they the to religious relics, right? Into these certain things are highly valued that don't obviously have any value, but the things that are valuable are reviled and rejected. And so life itself becomes kind of despicable. Physical existence is despicable. People often, I find, don't like children, and then young people don't like old people, and this kind of monoculture that's engendered in the society. I just want people like me, I want to be with people like me who like the music I like, and all this kind of bizarre, uh, whatever it is. It's sort of like it's a kind of disability that pretends to be taste. Um,
Good way to put it.
Any final thoughts, either of you?
Details about the book, like a title and availability and how people get a hold of it.
okay, yeah. Well, the book is the Localist Manifesto by myself, Paul Fenn, and it currently is available on the Accountable Publishing website, accountablepublishing.com.
Okay, we'll put that
Cool.
in the show notes on the website. And is Mediarchy, is that a new enterprise of yours also?
Yeah, we started speaking of local and physical reification, we started a newspaper here in town. And so I bought a printing machine. Somebody wanted to buy my website. And did I tell you the story? A couple of
I
years
don't
ago, a
think.
guy wrote me a letter, hand scribbled, "Hey, can I buy your domain?" I'll give you $10,000. And I was like, oh, I mean, I like $10,000, but I also like the domain and I wanted to use it. So I said, nah, I want $250,000. I wrote back. And he said, well, how about 100,000? I said, okay. So he gave
Wow.
me $100,000 for my domain name. And so I use that to buy this printing machine, and we're printing and lots of paper and ink. So we print this newspaper, and because I didn't want it for income, or we'd have to, make us look too rich on paper. So we formed a nonprofit and started publishing a newspaper and this website, Mediarchy. And yeah, just, crank it out 4 times a year. It's a quarterly at this point. It's sort of slow, but I figured also I could put, stuff from the book into it and then build up a mailing list and, just try to get the sort of thinking going. I sent you guys copies, right?
I thought we got on a mailing list, but I don't know that I actually got a copy.
Maybe you're on the list, but it hasn't come out since I put you on the list, maybe because it's
That could
quarterly.
be.
So anyway,
Right.
I know I put you on the list. But I should send you some of the copies we've put out. Anyway, so
And you
yeah,
have,
we're doing.
and you
Sorry?
have a group on Facebook that they can get in touch with information about that also, Mediarchy. Is that right?
We do. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And that's kind of just a teaser thing, it doesn't get me much either. So, but, yeah, it's all a fetish, I imagine, in the end, but I like doing it, you know.
That was cool, Paul. It's like a really interesting mix of very practical politics and history and impractical metaphysics that we get into together, and you definitely make me think, and I really appreciate having you. Thank you.
Well, God, thank you. I hope we can do it again or do something else
Yeah,
sometime.
It's
I
a good
really
one.
like your question. Really, the three of us, literally, what should we do? That got me thinking too. So we'll have to take that one offline too.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. All right.
Good. Thank you all.
Sounds okay.